Welcome to another episode of the Practical SQL Server HADR show. My name is Edwin Sarmiento and welcome. If this is the first time you're joining in, welcome. You can watch all of the past recordings of all of the episodes. I started calling them episodes because I'm doing this on a regular basis anyway, so might as well call them episodes. There are a ton of resources available for you in the archive section. If you're watching this on LinkedIn, there are other posts, including these live streams. You have to go scroll and find out exactly what those are. YouTube has all of them, so you can always go to my YouTube channel. If this is the first time you're joining in, welcome. Say hi on wherever you are, Twitter, LinkedIn, or YouTube, because sometimes I see the comments and then I would respond and say hi everyone, those who are joining in. All right. My name is Edwin Sarmiento, and I specialize in SQL Server, high availability, and disaster recovery. And here I talk about anything SQL Server, high availability, and disaster recovery. For the past couple of weeks, ever since I started this earlier this year, I was answering questions, so you may see a form down below where I put a link to a form where you could submit questions way ahead of time so that I can respond to them in these sessions live. Sometimes it is a little bit challenging for me because I don't know which category they fall under, and that's why I've also categorized and created like themes every week, stuff like patch management, monitoring, troubleshooting, failover clusters, anything that is about SQL Server, high availability, and disaster recovery. Although this month is a little bit of a diversion. I don't know what the right word is. English is not my first language. Anyway, this is a little bit different from the usual AMA sessions where I would answer questions from the people who have submitted questions earlier on. It's a byproduct of all of the questions that were submitted for the past couple of weeks, and I've started analyzing them and looking at trends. I mean, come on, data professionals, we kind of have to work with data on a regular basis. And as a side effect of that, you start to see patterns. Not just from the way the questions were asked, but what the questions are, the quality of the questions. And like I said in the previous session, it's easy for me to identify the background, the skill set, the experience, the expertise of the person asking the question based on the quality of the questions they're asking. And there is a theme. Every time I look at somebody asking a question, I am curious about where they're coming from, mainly because the context also matters. Today's topic, or this week's topic, let me put a banner up real quick, is all about the curse of silos. For those of you who work in smaller organizations where it's a one-man IT team, you don't have one. This is pretty common for large organizations where you have like multiple teams, like somebody's taking care of the server, so that's the server team. Somebody's taking care of the hardware, that's the hardware team. Somebody is responsible for networking, hence the network team's taking care of that. Somebody's taking care of the failover cluster, and then there's the DBA team, and then there's the developers. I have nothing against developers, in case you're thinking. I used to be a developer in my previous life, and so I don't want to make fun of developers, even though it's fun to make fun of developers. But the thing is, in large organizations, specifically for highly regulated industries like finance or healthcare or legal, these industries require segregation of duties. And so if you're a DBA, you're only focused on working on the databases. You can't do work that has something to do with the operating system, for that matter. Or you cannot do work with anything related to networking or you cannot do work that is related to the other platforms. And the thing that I've seen, especially with some of the questions that have been asked, and my own personal experience working with any SQL Server high availability solutions that are being deployed, whether it's a part of a project or um, somebody wanted a platform for their application, or migration from an older version to a newer version, but then they want high availability with a side of availability groups. I'm talking about fries and ketchup and mayonnaise. I'm starting to get hungry here. And anytime a project is about to roll out a high availability solution, this is something that I've seen that has caused a ton of project failures and project delays. This, in fact, is one of the major reasons for project failures. Okay. Again, in large organizations, especially with segregation of duties, the DBAs cannot even do the work when it is outside the scope of his responsibility. And I can understand that because, again, if you're working in, let's say, in a restaurant, for instance, the chef is not going to be taking orders. The waiter has to do that. When, again, in a restaurant, the manager's taking care of, dealing with the daily operations. Somebody has to clean and do the dishes. Somebody has to serve the patrons. I don't know what they call them in restaurants. But again, it's understandable that you have silos within the IT team in and of itself, especially in highly regulated industries. Again, in small organizations where you're the only person on a team, you are everything. You're the DBA, you're the sysadmin, you're the developer, you're the guy who fixes coffee, who photocopies documents, you're the one-man IT shop, which I, bless your heart, it's not something I like doing. I was one back in the days where I had to do every IT thing within the organization. But the thing is, the reason why I say I call it the curse of silos is because I've seen it as one of the most common reason, the major reason why a lot of projects fail. I mean, when you think about this, in a siloed organization, the DBA team may not be aware of what the systems team is doing. The network team is not aware of what the DBAs are doing. In fact, there were a couple of troubleshooting exercises where I get pulled in to troubleshoot an outage, not realizing it was something that the network team has done. Okay? And again, this is pretty common in very large organizations. And the reason I want to talk about this is because it will affect your work as a database administrator taking care of SQL Server always-on availability groups or any high availability solution, which also goes back to the database administrator being the default blame acceptor. We have this running joke in the data platform community about the DBA being the database administrator, which we often call the default blame acceptor. If something goes wrong, it's the database. It is the database. It's the problem. In fact, one of the projects that I recently worked on is a performance problem. I rarely work on performance issues, but I get to play the defense attorney for SQL Server. There was a performance issue going on, and they immediately blamed the database, even though the database is barely hitting all cylinders. Less than 60% CPU utilization, less than 60% memory utilization. The database is on all flash array. So immediately when something goes wrong, it's the database that is a problem, and the database administrator ends up defending his case. And this is a byproduct of silos. And the thing about this is the DBA's role is very significant because you have a pulse on just about anything within the IT organization. What that means is you're in the perfect spot because everything touches the database. Active Directory when it comes to authentication. Uh, your SQL Server database would need Active Directory if you're using Windows authentication. SQL Server has to have access to the network in order for applications to connect to it. Uh, it has to allow client applications to connect to it. Therefore, you get to see what is going on with the application stack. You get to talk to the developers. You get to talk to the Windows guys if they're the ones responsible for the operating system. You get to talk to the network guys. You get to talk to the systems guys, the security people, everything. And I even talk about the fact that, the data professional, the database administrator specifically, is actually an ideal candidate for an IT manager because you have visibility about or visibility on what is going on. You don't have to know all of the technologies. You just understand that everything goes through the database. But going back to the topic at hand about the curse of being silos, it impacts your role, your responsibility as a database administrator or as a systems administrator taking care of SQL Server always on availability groups. And I see 3 reasons why this has become a curse. Like I mentioned in the beginning, that this is one of the major reasons why projects fail. I mean, availability group deployment projects fail. First, and of course, make sure that you have a pen and paper ready, take notes. The first reason why silos are a curse and a major reason why deployment projects fail is because they hinder proper and effective inter-team communications. Every team is different. Every team has its own way of communicating. I mean, even in organizations where you're sitting in the same room, and when you turn to your right, you got your network guys, you turn to your left, you got your systems guys, and even if you're sitting right next to each other, although even more challenging in the days of the pandemic where everybody's working from home, or most of the people working in the tech team works from home, it's even more challenging because every team will have its own way of communicating with the other members of its own team. And because there are differences in ways of communicating, it becomes challenging to even get something done. I'll give you a very simple example. You submit a ticket for a change request, and it's supposed to be done by the Windows sysadmins because it's an operating system related change. And your verbiage, the way you talk about it, is different from the way they talk about it. In an availability group example, you talk about, hey, create a listener name, but the Active Directory guys or the systems guys don't know anything about a listener because it's different from how they call it. It's just like saying, that's a vehicle. No, that's a car. No, it's an automobile. You all are referring to the same thing, except that you're using different verbiage. And silos hinder proper and effective inter-team communications. I remember a client that I worked with, this was back in 2015. A client recently deployed SQL Server 2014 back then, and they were trying out several features where they were deploying multi-site availability groups, meaning one replica is on one data center and another replica is on another data center. And because they're exploring new features, like back then they were leveraging in-memory OLTP with the traditional transactional RDBMS features, they wanted somebody to have a look at their availability group infrastructure. Is it solid? Is it reliable? Or do we need a second pair of eyes to make sure that we're not missing out on anything that would potentially cause an outage? And I kind of sense that there is something going on within the team. And the reality is I can do whatever I need to do remotely. Give me a VPN connection. I can connect to your network, do the work, And that's it. But during our communication with the IT manager, I kind of sensed that there was something wrong with the team itself. And I said, okay, while it is possible for me to do the work remotely, I wanted to visit your team and have a conversation with them, not virtually through Skype or now Microsoft Teams or go. No, I want to be there in your office. At first, they were hesitant because I know we can't afford your travel and accommodation. I said, I'm going to cover that. I just want to be there. By the time I get there, it only took me 40 minutes to identify what the real problem was. Has nothing to do with SQL Server always on availability groups, has nothing to do with anything tech related. Sure, they need my help with looking at how the availability group was set up, how it was configured, and if it was okay. But I sensed that there was something wrong with the way the teams are communicating. The DBAs have no clue that the developers are actually rolling out code that is interfering with the way they do their maintenance work. The network guys have no idea that the DBAs need specific firewall rules to allow inter-node communication or replica communication between those two sites. The network guys have no clue about what the sysadmins are doing with the web servers and all of these things. And it's interesting because even though they are a relatively small team, the IT team's less than 25 people. That's still relatively small. I mean, we're not talking about building separation. They're still sitting in the same room, big room that is, with cubicles. But the thing is, because of the way they work, it was challenging to even get a message across. So silos hinder proper and effective inter-team communication. I mean, like I said in the beginning, we kind of talk different languages. Availability group, DBAs talk about availability group listener names. The sysadmins or the Active Directory guys don't even have a clue what a listener is all about. You could talk to them in terms of Active Directory jargons and terms that they understand, like I need a cluster name object, or I need a virtual computer object. That's what they understand. But the DBAs only know about it as a listener name. So they submit a ticket, change request, I need a listener name. With silos like this, and again, one of the reasons why I mentioned in the beginning, this is one of the big reasons, the barriers to successful deployment of always-on availability groups. Even worse is when your always-on availability group is already in production and the teams have no clue about what is happening. I remember another case that I worked with a couple of years ago where one of the Windows sysadmins accidentally, and I emphasize the word accidental because nobody would intentionally do something like that. They accidentally deleted the virtual computer object associated with the availability group listener name. Maybe he thought, well, this is not in my documentation, I'll remove it. We're doing security. I don't know. I don't really know the background of the story. But he accidentally deleted the virtual computer object associated with the listener name in Active Directory. Of course, in the beginning, the availability group's still up and running, so long as there was no failover happening, they were fine. Until they had to install patches on the secondary, reboot the node, and then failover. That's when they found out they couldn't failover because there was a missing virtual computer object in Active Directory that is needed for the listener name in order for it to come online. And this is the thing about having one team doing their responsibilities, not being aware of what is going on, that this is exactly what the other teams need, right? We keep track of change requests with proper change management process. But the thing is, for some people, it's just a change request. You get to do this. Somebody submitted a ticket, I get to do this, without really understanding what is going on. And this is the first thing, that silos hinder proper and effective inter-team communications. I spend so much time on that because, again, communication is key. what's really ironic is the fact that modern communications started in IT. It started in tech. Your smartphones, your smartphones, your live streaming platforms, collaboration tools. Technology made modern communication possible, yet we're not communicating properly, right? Because we're, again, as introverts, as tech professionals, we would rather be on our keyboards and send instant messages. And this is the challenge as well that adds on to the curse of silos. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one is that silos cause delays in deployments and projects. Huge deployment delays. Again, imagine the back and forth between the DBA submitting a change request to the Active Directory guys. And of course, this is for granting permissions or pre-staging Active Directory objects. A DBA would submit a change request. The Active Directory guys don't understand what it is, submits the change request back. They may or may not respond immediately. So a simple thing that could be done in literally minutes would take hours, sometimes even days. And this pushes back deployment even more to a point where it is getting delayed and even more delayed. I was working with a client. This was last month. It's interesting. I was working with a client last month where I was doing an analysis and review of their availability group infrastructure and realizing that the Windows sysadmins were the ones responsible for building the failover cluster, and because they're regulated, they have segregation of duties. The DBA inherited an existing always-on available group, and the previous DBA left, and now he's taking care of this. Because of his limited and restricted access, he has got to submit tickets after tickets after tickets in order to even make something or even do something as simple as, I want to run these tools. And again, it is important. Part of that is having the proper change management process, especially when security and regulation and security policies are involved. I'm not going to give you admin access if you don't need it. And even if you need to, we would have to go through certain processes in order for you to be granted that. But imagine how long it is going to take to get something as simple as, I'll use the example I used earlier, create an availability group listener name if they are going to give you permissions. Imagine. It pushes delays, especially if the person taking care of that change outside of the DBA team has no clue about what this is all about. And deploying an availability group is already complex in and of itself. And the reality is, even though one person can do it, it's not recommended because you have to rely on all of these things outside of SQL Server. You have to rely on the underlying operating system. You have to rely on the Windows sysadmins taking care of the underlying operating system. If they're the same people taking care of the failover cluster, you have to rely on the Windows sysadmins. You have to rely on the Active Directory and the DNS guys. If somebody else other than the Windows team is responsible for Active Directory and DNS, you have to rely on the network team so that they don't block all the necessary ports that availability groups need. And so these are the things that could prevent further deployment and rollout of an availability group if, number one, there is no effective and proper inter-team communications. It causes more of the delays. And guess who is going to get blamed for all of those delays? The DBA. Whether you like it or not, you're getting blamed for something that you have no control over. That's the reality. And hard to be at the center of everything and getting all of the blame when you got nothing to do with it. It just so happens that you're responsible for the availability group, right? And you know how it is with delays in deployments and project, that is costing the company, not just in terms of the budget, it also costs you with your time, because now you have to ramp up on the things that had to be done because you're trying to cut short on the deployment timeline. This is, again, let's just ignore about the fact that there's a lot of cost to the company. Let's just talk about the fact that there's cost to you. Now you're getting blamed for the things that you're not responsible for, and they're expecting you to do it. Yes, and then you sleep at the end of the day thinking, I'm getting blamed for things that I have no control over and I have nothing to do with. So yes, it does cause delays on the deployment. And silos in and of itself, the third thing is that silos in and of itself create division. Whether you like it or not, they create division. It's the me versus you, the we versus them. And when that culture exists, it becomes difficult to get something done. It becomes difficult to get something done. That's one of the reasons why I mentioned earlier. I don't like making fun of the developers, even though it's easy to make fun of them. I don't make fun of the network guys. I try to be as nice as possible to them because we already have the segregation of duties, and this creates division in the teams themselves, because every single team will have its own culture. They will have their own ways of doing things. And if what you are doing as a DBA is not in alignment or is not the same as what they're doing, it will be like it's you versus we. Now, instead of getting a lot of stuff done, you're going to get a lot of pushbacks. No, we don't need this. And sometimes it's not even a disagreement on the merits of whether it has to be done. Sometimes their personal preferences come before them, to a point where they're not even trying to understand the logic behind your request. It's just because they're them. I call it discrimination. You think it only exists in social circles? Silos are social circles. And so just the fact that you have to deal with somebody else who's totally different from your team, we're already prejudiced about them. Oh, I don't like the Active Directory guys, or I don't like the storage guys. They always thin provision things, and even a word they say would cause judgment on anything, whether they're trying to help you or not. And this is the curse, and that's why I kind of use the curse of silos, because these are things that prevent us from doing the work that we need to do, from you doing the work that you need to do. Imagine how it would be like, because SQL Server depends on the failover cluster, it depends on networking, it depends on Active Directory and DNS, and then you have an outage, and you are dependent on the sysadmins. Of course, everybody would tell you, no, it's supposed to be your responsibility. You're the DBA, and the databases are not accessible. And then you tell them, well, I can't really do anything because that's supposed to be a failover cluster issue, not a SQL Server issue. But no, and this back and forth thing, the blaming, the finger pointing, is going to cause more issues than solve the outage problem. I've seen so many cases where I really had to step in because the sysadmins are blaming the DBAs are blaming the developers are blaming the vendor, and I just had to step in sometimes and say, hey, let's set aside all of our differences. Let's focus on the real goal here. And the goal is to bring the availability group online as quickly as we possibly can. Forget about the finger pointing and the blaming. It's not helping. Let's focus on the goal. And this, again, the silos create that division to a point where it's not helping solve problems. It's actually causing more problems. And so you might be thinking, well, there's really nothing we could do about this, because number one, if your organization is divided into silos, then you have to work with your own team. You cannot do any work outside of what your job responsibilities are. And so you have to be cautious about this. Now, you might be thinking, okay, there's this curse of silos. I'm at a disadvantage because I'm at the center of this. What do I do? What you need to do is to become really, really good at two things: engaging and collaborating. Now, it sounds simple, but it actually isn't. Like I said earlier, we pioneered modern communications, yet we cannot even communicate properly as tech professionals. It is important for you to learn how to engage and collaborate. Engage in a way where I kind of make the joke of be nice to your developers, be nice to your sysadmins, be nice to your storage engineers. But the reality is just be nice to them. Yeah, just be nice to them. Buy them coffee, get them something to drink, or just say nice things about them. Find something to really appreciate about them. Be genuinely curious about what they're doing and show them how much you appreciate what they do. Just engage them, and in the process, learn what they're doing. You don't need to replace them, because sometimes, these silos sometimes causes a lot of fear and anxiety from the people on those teams, thinking, why is he trying to learn all of these things? Is he gonna replace me? Right? Just show them genuine concern and appreciation and curiosity to know what they're doing so that you can help them. And you can always communicate it in such a way that, hey, I want to learn so that I can help make your life better and help them. Niceness and being kind, kindness and being nice go a long way. And so you have to learn how to engage them. You have to learn how to communicate and collaborate with them. All of these have nothing to do with the tech aspect of what needs to be done in order for your available groups to run smoothly, in order for them to be highly available, stable, reliable. Nothing. It's just human interaction. But of course, a lot of us struggle so much with this because we would rather be stuck on a keyboard in our screen and just work with the things that we work on. The reality is, this is what we need to face every single day. You have to work with people from different teams. You have to know how to deal with them. You have to know how to engage them. You have to know how to communicate with them and eventually collaborate them. In the beginning, I said the DBA is actually at the perfect spot because you're at the center of everything. Application connects to the database. If the developers need to deploy code, and the code all of a sudden takes up or does a lot of locking and blocking, you get to understand how the developers wrote their code, which gives you an opportunity to communicate with them. The database has to be connected to the network, and so you have an opportunity to engage and talk to and communicate with your network guys, understanding what they're doing, how they're doing it. Again, not to replace them, because that's a fear that could come up every once in a while. And be nice to them. Engage the Active Directory guys. Hey, I need some permissions over here in order for me to be able to do this. I don't need domain admin privileges. Hopefully nobody's giving you domain admin privileges. But again, engage and communicate and collaborate so that you can bring the team together, because you as a database administrator are at a perfect spot because you're at the center of everything. And if you can build on learning how to engage, how to communicate, and how to collaborate, you're the perfect person to move up to the management role, or the CIO, even the CTO, because you understand what is going on. Of course, that's not something that you want. You don't have to. But the thing is, you are at the perfect spot for career progression when you start to think about it. But the reality is this. It is very difficult to engage or to communicate or to collaborate if you don't even know where to start. In fact, in the beginning, I talked about how the DBAs might refer to an availability group listener name as a listener when they submit a change request to the Active Directory guys. They may think, what's this listener thing? I don't know what it is. And so it causes more confusion, more communication issues. It's just like, the French people are talking to the Italian unless they understand both languages. They might be referring to the exact same thing, but because they're using totally different verbiage or dialects or words even, they don't understand each other. It is challenging to engage and collaborate and communicate if you don't even know what to communicate. And that's why it is very important for you to understand end to end what makes up an availability group. How does it work? Where is it running on top of? What are the different external dependencies that it needs in order to function properly? Because by doing so, you will have the opportunity to talk to the people who are responsible for those. And even when it comes to not just deployment of new available group infrastructures, even managing existing ones, you need to talk to whoever you need to talk to, helping them get their jobs done and making their lives easy becomes now a part of what you need to do in order to get your job done easier as well. And if you definitely need help with anything related to always on availability groups, and like I said, it's kind of difficult to engage with the other teams if you don't even know how to start a conversation, right? If you need help with anything related to always on availability groups or anything SQL Server high availability and disaster recovery, use that link on the screen. It will direct you to my calendar page where you can schedule a time to have a conversation with me. Book a time using my calendar. Let's schedule a 45-minute to an hour worth of time to talk about your challenges. They could be non-technical challenges that are impacting the way your availability groups work. And during those 45 minutes, we can explore how you can move forward. You can get really clear on what it is that you need in order to successfully deploy or even manage an existing availability group. Again, use that link on the screen, schedule a call, and let's have that chat. And I can guarantee you are going to get more value in that 45 minutes to an hour worth of conversation than you have doing it on your own and trying to figure things out on your own and struggling to understand the Microsoft documentation and all of these information available to you. Again, use that link on the screen. Let's schedule a conversation, and I'm more than happy to help you in any way I can. All right, that's about it for this week's episode of the Practical SQL Server HADR show. Tune in again next week for another topic. Depending on the number of questions that I get, I may do another AMA session. But again, join me for another topic of conversation next week where I talk about how to really make deployment, implementation, and management of SQL Server high availability solutions practical. Not just doing it, but rather just making it practical so you can take action. Because at the end of the day, if you cannot even take action on the information that you're getting, it's useless. And I want to make it as practical and as simple as I possibly can to help you become more effective in your work. All right. Enjoy the rest. I can say weekend because it's Friday. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you again next time for another episode